Call. Let's go now to file item 36, AB 964. The clerk will read.
Assembly Bill 964 by Assemblymember Chow, enacting the civil law.
Mr. Chow, you may open.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. 2014 was a record-setting year in terms of the number of security breaches reported. According to a January 2015 report by the California Attorney General's Office, there were 187 breaches reported to the Department of Justice, and compared to 167 in 2013 and 131 in 2012. Under current law, if the personal information that was stolen was encrypted, businesses and agencies are not required to provide notice. This provision serves to encourage businesses and agencies that store personal information to adopt encryption. However, encryption is not clearly defined in statute. AB 964 defines for purposes of data breach notification requirements for businesses and public agencies the term encrypted data to mean data that has been rendered unusable, unreadable, or indecipherable to an unauthorized person through a security technology or methodology generally accepted in the field of information security. With that, I respectfully ask for a vote.
Mr. Obernolte, you are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members, I rise in support of AB 964. The opposition to this bill is centered around the belief that this bill imposes new requirements on California businesses to encrypt their data. That belief is unfounded. This bill merely adds a definition of what it means for data to be encrypted, and that definition is technically sound. I urge an aye vote.
I'm sorry. Mr. Hadley, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I also rise in support of this bill, and I thank the author for working with folks and taking amendments along the way, and I urge an aye vote.
Seeing and hearing no further debate, Mr. Chow, you may close.
I respectfully ask your aye vote.
The clerk will open the roll. All members vote who desire to vote. All members vote who desire to vote. All members vote who desire to vote. The clerk will close the roll and tally the votes. Ayes 51, noes 4. The measure passes. Colleagues, we're going to pass and retain file items 37 and 38. Now to file item 39, AB 3. The clerk will read.
Assembly Bill 3 by Assemblymember Williams, enacting the local government.
Assemblymember Williams, you may open.
Mr. Speaker and members, AB 3 is a district bill. It would allow Isla Vista residents to vote on their own governance structure by directing the Board of Supervisors to place a community services district on the ballot. The community services district would provide critical services to the community of Isla Vista, including the ability to contract for additional public safety services, lighting, and a parking program to be able to ban non-resident parking on party nights. This is in order for us to deal with the multiple challenges that happen in this community. Not only the big high-profile ones you've heard about, the riot last year, the mass killing last year, the high-profile rapes, but also the everyday things that you don't hear about. AB 3 outlines services the CSD can provide, including a tenant mediation program, the ability to contract for additional police services, and exercising the power of a parking district. It establishes a 7-member board, 5 elected and 2 appointed positions, and it authorizes the CSD to levy a UUT, which is essential to the general community support of the bill. This bill stays away from property taxes, creates a 2-tiered approval process requiring the 2/3 voter approval of the formation of the district. So members, whether or not you agree with this plan in specific, the fundamental question is whether the people of Isla Vista should have the right to vote on their own self-governance. I ask for your aye vote.
Seeing and hearing no further debate, the clerk will open the roll. All members vote who desire to vote. 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 The clerk will close the roll and tally the votes. Ayes 41, noes 23. The measure passes. We're going to pass and retain file item 40. File item 41 we've already dispensed with. File item 42 will also pass and retain. File item 43 will pass and retain. File item 44, AB 507. The clerk will read.
Assembly Bill 507 by Assemblymember Olson and others, enacting to the Department of Consumer Affairs, declaring the urgency thereof to take effect immediately.
Assemblymember Olson, you may
Thank
proceed.
you, Mr. Speaker and members. As recommended by the State Auditor, AB 507 would require the Department of Consumer Affairs to describe its planning efforts for the next phase of BREEZE, including any cost-benefit analyses done. It is the first of several steps toward making sure that BREEZE becomes a functioning system for Californians, and that if a problem should arise again in the future, all hands are on deck to mitigate the problems early on. To help ensure that Californians and our constituents have a licensing system that they can rely on, I respectfully urge your aye vote on AB 507.
Mr. Jones, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. I rise in support of AB 507. As a licensee myself among millions of licensees in California, I think it's very important that we all keep in mind that the cost of funding BREEZE comes from hardworking Californians that are trying to earn a living, pay their taxes, raise their families, and at the same time being not taxed, but a fee charged on them by the state to have the opportunity to work in California. And then this BREEZE program comes along, and we can't even get it to work right. And those are your constituents and my constituents' licensing fees that are paying for this. They deserve this oversight. We deserve to have a BREEZE system that's going to work properly, and we deserve to have a DCA Department of Consumer Affairs that's going to work with us as in the legislature and make sure that we get these databases working properly. I urge an aye vote.
Assemblymember Bonilla, you're recognized.
I also urge an aye vote on this measure. We had really an extensive hearing on the issue. We found that there were a number of issues that I believe this continual oversight and this reporting that is included in this bill will help to rectify. There are hundreds of thousands of our constituents, as have already been stated, who are now responsible for paying greatly increased costs for this program. It's a necessary program. There's been good in it. There are some efficiencies that have been truly seen to benefit our licensees. But I think the higher degree of accountability is called for, and I urge your aye vote on this bill.
Seeing and hearing no further debate, Ms. Olson, you may close. Okay, the clerk will open the roll. All members vote who desire to vote. All members vote who desire to vote. All members vote who desire to vote. The clerk will close the roll and tally the votes. Ayes 71, no 0 on the urgency. Ayes 71, no 0 on the bill. The measure passes. Going now to file item 45, AB 935. The clerk will read.
Assembly Bill 935 by Assemblymember Salas and others, enacting to integrated regional water management plans.
Assemblymember Salas, you may open.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. I present before you AB 935, would provide funding for the planning, design, and construction of local and regional conveyance projects that support regional and interregional connectivity and provide for strategic water management. With that, I respectfully ask for an aye vote.
Seeing and hearing no further debate, the clerk will open the roll. All members vote who desire to vote. All members vote who desire to vote. All members vote who desire to vote. The clerk will close the roll and tally the votes. Ayes 70, no 0. The measure passes. Colleagues, at this time, we're going to go back to file item 35. I'm going to lift the call on file item 35, AB 709. The clerk will post. All members vote who desire to vote. The clerk will close the roll and tally the votes. Ayes 42, noes 24. The measure passes. Going now back to file item 46, AB 968. The clerk will read.
Assembly Bill 968 by Assemblymember Williams and others, enacting into post-secondary education.
Mr. Williams, you may proceed.
Mr. Speaker, members, this is the second of the 3 bills that came out of the sexual assault hearings on campuses that the Higher Education Committee did for the past 2 years. It establishes a standard notation across all of California's higher education segments for academic transcripts that will indicate on one of those transcripts when the student is ineligible to re-enroll due to suspension or expulsion for sexual assault. Currently, there is no standard method for noting on a transcript when a student is suspended or expelled for violating a university's code of conduct, which includes campus sexual assault. Community colleges only make a notation on student transcripts for academic dismissal or academic disqualifications. CSU does make a general notation on transcript if they're expelled for 1 year or more, and UC does make a general notation. But this is all different, and no system is the same. And the inconsistency between the post-secondary education segments demonstrates the need to establish a state standard that provides more clarity and more information for universities when they consider a transfer student from another campus. This bill would create that standard, and I ask for your aye vote.
Seeing and hearing no further debate, the clerk will open the roll. All members vote who desire to vote. All members vote who desire to vote. All members vote who desire to vote. The clerk will close the roll and tally the votes. Ayes 71, no 0. The measure passes. Moving to file item 47 for amendments, AB 1142. The clerk will read.
Assembly Bill 1142 with amendments by Assemblymember Gray.
Mr. Gray, you may open on your amendments.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members, the amendments before us address fiscal concerns. I would respectfully ask for your aye vote.
Seeing and hearing no further debate, we can take a voice vote on the amendments. All those in favor of the amendments, please say aye. All opposed, please say nay. The ayes have it. The amendments are adopted. The bill is out to print and back on file. Going now to file item 48, AB 1200. The clerk will read.
Assembly Bill 1200 by Assemblymember Gordon, enacting relating to the Political Reform Act of 1974.
Assemblymember Gordon, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members, one of the reasons California voters enacted the Political Reform Act was to ensure that the activities of lobbyists should be regulated and their finances disclosed. To serve this goal, the Political Reform Act requires lobbying firms and parties employing a lobbyist to report their legislative and regulatory activities. This structure is working and is not overly burdensome. The idea for AB 1200 was brought to me by 3 McGeorge Law School students who wrote a paper and the proposal after learning that lobbying related to procurement contracting decisions by state agencies is not included within the scope of lobbying under the Political Reform Act, despite the fact that the state authorizes over $11 billion in procurement contracts just last year. The premise of AB 1200 is that if we require disclosure on all legislative matters, why wouldn't we require disclosure on billions of dollars worth of state procurement contracts? Accordingly, AB 1200 adds governmental procurement to the Political Reform Act and therefore brings state procurement contracts within the types of government decisions that are covered by the state's lobbying laws. The effects of AB 1200 would be to provide greater sunshine on an area where significant amounts of taxpayer money is committed. In practical terms, it would require those lobbying on procurement contracts to report this aspect of their business. It should be noted that nothing in the bill would prohibit conversations between lobbyists and officials involved in procurement. Rather, disclosure of the activities provides transparency, assurance that the process is fair, and a means to detect and prosecute improper activity. 18 states, as well as the federal government, already require lobbyists to report procurement lobbying activity. So this bill is more of a catch-up as opposed to instituting brand new policy. AB 1200 is limited to state procurement contracts and was recently amended to further narrow the bill to apply to contracts over $250,000 so that small business would not be affected. Further, the bill was amended to exempt bona fide salespersons so that the proverbial Xerox salesman would not be affected. AB 1200 has no registered opposition, and I respectfully ask for an aye vote.
Mr. Bigelow, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise in support of AB 1200, which will bring disclosure and transparency to an area where significant taxpayer dollars are being spent. AB 1200 is not burdensome as it utilizes the existing lobbying rules and reporting requirements that are currently working. No new structure or bureaucracy will be created by this bill. For these reasons, I ask for your aye vote.
Mr. Jones, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And members, I also rise in support of AB 1200. I abstained in appropriations because I had some concerns about the fees and the costs, in addition to some of the reporting requirements. The author has answered those concerns, I think, appropriately. And as he said in his opening statement, this provides sunshine. We live in the sunshine state, so I think some more sunshine is a good thing. I ask for an aye vote.
Ms. Grove, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise in support of this bill, and the reason why is because the author has been so congenial in working out some of the issues that we had as the minority party. And when you think about some of the issues that we have, a lot of the times they're related to business issues that people don't look at from a business perspective, not being business owners. And when I shared with the author that the way the language was intended, or the way the language was put forth at first, that it would encompass regular salespeople at a local county level, he understood that. He immediately took the amendments. That was not his intent. He could have really told me to go pound sand, and but he really did take the amendments, and he made it better for all business and creates a transparency and sunshine in California. So I urge an aye vote.
Seeing and hearing no further debate, Mr. Gordon, you may close.
With sand and sunshine, I would just request an aye vote on this bill.
The clerk will open the roll. All members vote who desire to vote. All members vote who desire to vote. All members vote who desire to vote. The clerk will close the roll and tally the votes. Aye 68, no 0. The measure passes. File item 49 we've dispensed with. Let's go to file item 50, AB 1235. The clerk will read.
Assembly Bill 1235 by Assemblymember Gibson, enacting the Medi-Cal.
Mr. Gibson, you're recognized. Mr. Gibson, would you like to pass temporarily? Pass temporarily. Colleagues, file item 51. We will pass and retain file item 52. We'll pass temporarily file item 53. We will pass and retain file item 54. We've already dispensed with. File item 55, AB 1258. The clerk will read.
Assembly Bill 1258 by Assemblymember Chow, enacting to elementary and secondary education.
Mr. Chow, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members, AB 1258 establishes a public-private partnership grant pilot program to support innovative ways of introducing and engaging students from historically underrepresented groups to computer science. As the world continues to move towards a technology-intensive society, we as state leaders must do more to bring computer science to all California students. According to the U.S. Bureau of Labor, by the year 2020, 4.6 million jobs will be in computing or information technology, which is more than all other science, technology, engineering, and mathematics combined. AB 1258 addresses the critical need by establishing a public-private partnership between the tech industry and local educational agencies to provide competitive grants to school districts to establish and maintain computer science courses and provide professional development for educators to teach computer science. With that, I respectfully ask for an aye vote.
Ms. Olson, you're recognized.
1 second. Sorry. Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. I hate to do this because I love this bill, but I do rise in support of in opposition of AB 1258 for one reason. And again, I preface this with, I love this bill. We have a lot of work to do to expand computer science curriculum and education, advanced computer science and education in our schools across California in order to meet workforce demands. But having said that, I have to be consistent. And I have stood on this floor many times. I have spoken in Education Committee many times about the fact that we have to give the local control funding formula an opportunity to work. And every time we go back to reinstitute a categorical program for anything, no matter how fantastic of a program it might be, we are undermining the local control funding formula that this body just passed 2 years ago. This is a great bill, but the people who should be passing these bills are school board members. These are the conversations that need to be taking place in a robust, vigorous way at every school district, in every school board meeting across the state of California, and I will be standing right there in support of the people lobbying for them. But it is no longer our job, it's not our jurisdiction, and for that reason, I urge a no vote on this bill.
Mr. Patterson, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Members, and a question to the author.
Without objection.
Do the grants that you are creating, are they available to charter schools, or have charter schools been eliminated from participating for these grants?
You may choose to answer that or answer that in your class.
The charter schools are not excluded from the bill. In fact, the intent of the language is to be inclusive. Whether the school is a traditional school or charter school, they will be included. So that is a no to your question. Now, as far as the definition of the schools being included, we are in the process of revising the definition to make it a more inclusive term or a neutral term. The term that we've been toying with is the LEA, which is the local educational agency, which will be more inclusive of all schools. So to answer your question, short answer to your question, it's inclusive of all schools.
Okay, appreciate that. The Charter School Association of California is in opposition to this bill. Their expressed opposition is because they have been excluded. Now, is the answer to my question an unequivocal yes, that charter schools in the state of California have the same opportunity to apply for and gain the grants that are in this bill?
Yes.
The answer is yes.
That is the intent of the bill, yes. The intent of the bill is to include everyone.
And is the language explicit with respect to charter schools?
The language is explicit to the sense that it does not exclude charter schools, but as I mentioned before, we are in the process of amending the language to be more inclusive. The term that we've been thinking about of using is LEA, which is the local education agency, which is accordingly would be inclusive of all schools.
Mr. Stone,
Thank you.
State your point of order. Your mic is not on. Okay.
Question, point of order. Question was asked 3 times, answered 3 times. Can we move on, please?
There's no limit on the number of times you can ask.
There is no limit on the number of times we can ask a question, but of course we ask people to not be redundant and to proceed with the discussion.
Thank you very much. Sometimes the reason that the questions are asked several times is because we're not getting satisfactory answers. And I think in this case, I am still unsure of the language and of whether or not charter schools are precisely allowed, and I'm unclear about what this LEA is all about. And so I'm going to be a no on this until I can get assurances from the Charter School Association that they are satisfied that the bill does what you say it does.
Mr. Jones. Mr. Chow, do you want to respond to that?
The short answer to your question is the bill will include charter schools. Would that answer your question?
With that, Mr. Jones. Mr. Jones' mic is now down. Mr. Wagner.
Not real sure where to go. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Not entirely sure where to go with this, because what we just heard in answer to the questions from my good colleague from Fresno, I don't think are actually represented in the bill in front of us. Perhaps there's an intent to amend at a later stage of the proceedings, and it might be the author's intent that the charter schools not be excluded, but as drafted, by allowing only the school districts themselves to apply for these grants, you are de facto keeping the charter schools and their governing boards from being able to apply for these grants. So it may not be the intent, and there may be no explicit language in there saying the charter schools may not apply, but the absolutely unavoidable upshot of the language that is in there, allowing only the districts themselves, means that the charter schools are excluded. And so it would be my hope, with the author's explicit statement here on the floor that the charter schools are not excluded, that there be an amendment taken in the Senate or at the next opportunity, which I imagine will be the Senate, to make clear in the language of the bill what is now not, in fact, in the language of the bill, and as I understand it, entirely contradicted by the language of the bill. So I applaud the author's willingness to include the charter schools. I think that work needs to be done. With that said, and with no clear explanation as to why we are undoing the local control formula as was expressed, and because of this ambiguity on charter schools, I'd urge at this point a no vote.
Mr. Jones.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members, I also rise with the same concerns regarding the charter schools, and I know the authors attempted to answer the question several times, and maybe I can phrase the question in a different manner in which we might be able to get to a conclusion here on the floor today. If I may encourage the author either to answer a question or in his close to walk us through the process as the bill is currently written, how a charter school can apply for these grants, because I do share the concerns of our colleague from Orange County that the bill explicitly states that only school districts can apply for these grants, and many of us know that once a school district issues a charter, sometimes they check out of the oversight of that charter and then give them no further attention or support. So if the author could walk us through the process as the bill is currently written, how a charter school can apply for these grants.
Mr. Chow.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I think what triggered the confusion is the fact that the original language had the word school district in it, which prompted the possibility that school districts would exclude charter schools. And that's what also prompted the impetus for changing that term from school districts to LEA, which is defined in federal law, which would be inclusive of everyone. Now, instead of having charter schools spelled out, which is, I believe, a more cumbersome mechanism, I wanted to be inclusive by using a term which is neutral, which is what we think will solve the problem, and that is the LEA. Now, if somebody has a better idea of a better term that we could use to be inclusive, then I'm more than happy to consider that. But just to answer my colleague's question again, I do intend to include charter schools in this bill. Now, as far as the other question raised regarding the categorical program or the local funding formula, let me be very specific and clear. The local funding formula has nothing to do with this particular bill. In fact, this bill would create a public-private partnership, and the funding is going to come from private sources, for example, tech industry, which would create this partnership, not a categorical program. So none of the funds will come from the state, which is what constitutes a categorical program. So this is not a categorical program by this definition. In fact, according to many stakeholders, it should not be classified as a categorical program because the funding is coming from a private source. And it has nothing to do with the local funding formula per se.
Assemblymember Bonilla, you're recognized.
Yes, I just rise in support of this bill, and thank you for all the clarifications. I think this is an incredible opportunity. There's a reason that TechNet and Microsoft are supporting this effort, and it's because they want to come and partner with our schools around increasing STEM education and also teacher training opportunities in computer science. I think this is a great opportunity to have public-private partnerships within our schools. I think it recognizes a need within our education system. It's an innovative approach to actually find new funding outside of regular state funding, something that will really benefit our schools, benefit our students, and benefit education. And I think I want to commend the author on this very innovative approach to finding funding when we know that that's an issue for many of our local school districts. And I could be assured that my school district and many of your school districts would be in very strong support of being able to apply for this grant funding as it becomes available. I ask for your aye vote.
Seeing and hearing no further debate, Mr. Chow, you may close.
I just respectfully ask for aye vote. And just to be very clear, again, the bill will include charter schools. And secondly, this is not a categorical program. The funding is coming from a private source. It's coming from tech industry and private donors. So it should not be considered a categorical program. And also, it's a voluntary program. It is not mandated by the state or otherwise. So with that, I respectfully ask for your support and vote.
The clerk will open the roll. All members vote who desire to vote. All members vote who desire to vote. All members vote who desire to vote. The clerk will close the roll and tally the votes. Ayes 58, noes 12. The measure passes.